It's like a jigsaw puzzle, and if you've got, it's like having like 10, well, maybe say 15 or 20 different jigsaw puzzles all jumbled together in a box. First, you got to figure out which scroll or which puzzle it attaches to, and then you can put it together. So when they're all jumbled together like that.
It's fascinating to watch what they're doing and to look at the way the research is being done. And you're right. They're tiny. In some cases, these are tiny fragments. And you've really got to be a person that can see how things fit together. I mean, as I was watching this, I thought, I cannot imagine being the person who's trying to put all of this together and figure out exactly what piece goes with what. Another thing that it seems to me is that because of you're doing something like this, don't you think that this would enhance a reader's understanding of cultures, the Jewish and the Greek culture, and their history and language?
Yeah, it really does. There's an example, one example that I could cite a couple, but one example is, okay, so before the Babylonians captured, the Jews and took them back to Babylon, they had a problem with idolatry. They would worship stones and rocks and this and that and the other thing. And after they'd suffered in Babylon for a few decades and succeeding generations, their leaders, their rabbis were telling them, this happened to us because we didn't listen to what God said. And he said, don't worship anyone else besides me. And so they learned their lesson and they stopped worshiping all these other things. And they learned it so well that, in the Hebrew passage, David will say, the Lord is my rock, he is my fortress or whatever. Well, by the time the Greek translation was made, the Jews weren't going to say the Lord is my anything. He is the Lord. He's one God. There's no one else beside him. He's not a rock. He's not a tree. He's not anything else like that. So the Greek translator would say the Lord is my strength. They took the word rock out because they didn't want the reader to compare the Lord to a rock. And so they would change it to something else. So there was that cultural change of a change in Jewish thinking that you see over and over through the Psalms and other places. Then there's also cultural differences, like, well, anything as simple as what coin is used. So you might have a passage in the Hebrew Bible that says, he paid 30 pieces of silver. So let's say he paid 30 talents. Well, most people don't know what a talent is, except maybe it's something you're good at.
Right.
That's actually where that word actually comes from. But it comes from the Bible. But the on the Greek side, you'll say 30 drachmas or 30 didrachmas, which a didrachma is 2 drachmas. And coin collectors, I've got a friend at work. I showed him my translation, and he showed me a Greek didrachma from 300 BC. And it was in very good condition. I showed it, took it to my desk and showed it to me. It kind of anchors you to a different understanding because, basically the story is that when the Greek scholars were putting together this fantastic library in Alexandria, they said, hey, Jews, if you'll translate your Hebrew scriptures into Greek, we can include those in our library. And
hey, so Jews? Really?
No. Hey, you guys up north, because this is Alexandria, Egypt, and the Jews, up north in Palestine. So, a few days journey. So, so they're saying we're building this wonderful library, but the only thing is the people that are going to check these scrolls out don't have a clue how to read Hebrew, so would you mind translating this into Greek for us? And that's the story, the tradition is that's how it came to be. And it's called the Septuagint, which means 70, because 36 groups of 2 scholars each in each group created 36 different translations of the Old Testament, of the Jewish Old Testament into Greek. And when you looked at them, all 36 copies were word for word the same. So then they knew it was a divine inspired. This is the tradition. This is the lore behind it. And there's probably some element of truth to that. Most good stories have a core of truth to it. And it's very possible that that's why the Greek translation came to be. But that's why they called it 70. And so when I first heard that, I said, well, okay, if there's 36 groups and each one has 2 people, isn't that 72? Unless I learned my math wrong. He says, yeah, just go with it.
Oh, my gosh.
72 is close enough. That's why they call it Septuagint, because it's 70. So that's how it got its name. But, yeah.
This is just fascinating. You're so good at this, and you just got, I mean, you are a true scholar. Would you like to share a part of the book with the listeners?
There's a passage that I would like to read to you. It's if people don't know the story, it's the story of Joseph, who's one of 12 sons. Jacob had 12 sons, and that's where the 12 tribes of Israel come from. And Jacob favored Joseph and gave him a coat of many colors and all these other things. So his brothers hated him, threw him in a pit, and they were going to kill him. And then the slave traders came along. He was sold into slavery and went down to Egypt and accused of rape by his master's wife. I mean, it's a very involved story, but ends up in prison. And then after that, the Pharaoh elevates him to be number 2 in the entire kingdom. So now he's second in command for the most powerful kingdom on the earth at that time. And there's a famine. The brothers come down to get grain, and he reveals who he is to them. And Pharaoh says, well, why don't you? I'll give you some wagons, and you could send them back up north and bring your father back down so he can see you before he dies. So that's the backdrop for what I'm going to read here. So the sons of Israel did this. This is reading from Genesis 45, verse 21 to the end of the chapter. Joseph gave them wagons according to the command of the mouth of Pharaoh, and he gave them provisions for the journey. To all of them he gave each man changes of robes, but to Benjamin he gave 300 silver pieces and 5 changes of robes. And to his father he sent this: 10 male donkeys loaded with the good things of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys loaded with clean grain and bread and food for his father on the journey. So he sent his brothers away, and they left. And he said to them, do not get upset along the way. And they went up from Egypt and came to the land of Canaan, to Yaakov their father. And they reported to him, saying, Joseph still lives, and indeed he is ruler over all the land of Egypt. And his heart was numb, for he did not believe them. But they spoke to him all the words of Joseph that he spoke to them, and he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent to carry him back. And the spirit of their father, Yaakov, revived. Then Israel said, enough, my son Joseph still lives. I will go and see him before I die. And that's how that ends. And of course, that was on the Hebrew side. The Greek side is very similar. It's just on the other column here. But I thought the Hebrew was particularly forceful there.
I agree.
Or interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is just I mean, I've enjoyed our discussion so very much, and I think perhaps our listeners are saying to themselves, all right, where can I find the book? And I want to direct them, of course, to Amazon. It's just Amazon.com, and when you get to that page, their home page, it's always a little intimidating if you've never been there or if you've never done this for the first time. There's just a large sort of a gray box that's a search box. And if you'll type in the name of the book, and let me give you the name of the book, and let me spell Conrad's name for you. The name of the book is Greek / Hebrew Parallel Old Testament English Translation by Conrad, Conrad, the letter R, period, Gren, Gren. And if you click on that, it takes you right to the book, and you can read a summary about the book, and you can order it right there on that page. Is there somewhere else, Conrad, if people don't want to go to Amazon, is there somewhere else they could find the book?
Yeah, another location is the publisher that published this, and that would be Westboro. It's WESTBOWPRESS. That's all one word. .com, and you could find it there as well. And I would just, I'm lazy, so I've learned that if I just type my last name, Gren, this is pretty much the only thing that's going to pop up. So if they want to type all the other stuff out, they can. But I tried this, and I typed my last name Gren because, like I said, I'm a little bit on the lazy side when it comes to entering more than I need to, and that usually brings this up.
And that is an unusual last name, so I can see that would happen. Now, you also have a website. Let's tell our listeners a little about your website.
There's a website called grenbible.com. It's GRENBIBLE.com. And in there, there's some samples of my translation so that you can compare maybe some passages, compare them to a Bible that you're more familiar with, and see how they compare. And that's pretty much what's on that website. Is there one other thing I could mention?
Always.
About you were talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls. The other piece that's important to me is New Testament use of the Old Testament. And the thing is, the New Testament was written in Greek. So most of the time when they're translating from the Old Testament, they translate from the Greek Old Testament, which kind of makes sense. You just cut and paste or, and put it in there. If you're going to use Hebrew like Paul often did, he was a scholar, and either one was equally easy for him, but most of them were fishermen and didn't really know much about Hebrew, to be honest. Oftentimes what happens, in our Bible, if you pick up a Bible off the shelf and buy it at a store or whatever, the Old Testament is translated from the Hebrew because that is the original language, and the New Testament is translated from the Greek because that's the original language. But sometimes, as an example, in Acts 13:41, Paul is quoting the Old Testament in Habakkuk, and if you go back to Habakkuk and says, go to such and such, this is where this comes from, and you look that up in the Old Testament, it doesn't appear to be the same passage because the difference between the Hebrew and Greek is so amazing, and he quoted from the Greek Old Testament, not the Hebrew Old Testament. If you look that up in my column, in my book, you're going to see where the differences came in and why it is that the New Testament quote is so different from the Old Testament. It's because the Old Testament was in a different language, and something got lost in the translation there. And so for each one of those usages, I have a note explaining in detail, and for somebody that knows Hebrew and Greek, in the notes I will have the Hebrew and the Greek, and you can study it to your heart's content. And the interesting thing is those are the two drivers for my translation, the Dead Sea Scrolls and the New Testament use of the Old Testament. And it so happens that the 5 books in the Old Testament that they found the most copies of the Dead Sea Scrolls are Genesis, Exodus, Deuteronomy, Psalms, and Isaiah. And I don't know if this is happenstance or maybe there's something behind this, but the 5 books that are quoted in the New Testament from the Old Testament, the most common quotes come from Genesis, Exodus, Deuteronomy, Psalms, and Isaiah, the same 5 books. So I have to make sure I translate those 5 before I pass, and I've got 2 down, 3 to go. So
fascinating. Conrad, who do you think the audience is for your book? When you were writing it, who was in your head that was going to read it?
I would say that individuals that want to get, I think of God's Word as a radio message to humanity, and He's trying to tell us what He wants us to know so that we can live our lives better, so we can share with others, and so we can all meet together and see Him. And I believe my translation is just kind of fine-tuning the reception so it comes in a little more clearly. In other words, the original message that He transmitted to these prophets, to these writers, and they wrote these things down. Over the centuries, some things have gotten a little bit cloudy here and there, not dramatically so, but enough so that the meaning might not be as clear. And so I'm just trying to fine-tune the reception for the radio message.
I like that. Now, When our listeners become readers,